When does free speech cross the line? Central London, tens of thousands marching with the Palestine Solidarity Campaign on their way to Hyde Park. Passing a static counter-protest organised by Enough is Enough.
The protests about the war in Gaza are, of course, about the tens of thousands of civilians who've been killed. But they are also about the hostages that were taken on October 7th, who still haven't been returned. That is what has brought these counter-protesters up. But here in London, in the States and in France, in democracies, there is another issue. Free speech. How do we protect it? Where does free speech begin? Where does it end?
And in the middle of all this, policing. Following a week of controversy about contested exchanges between a Jewish campaigner and the Met and how to keep the peace. Many Jewish people say these marches make them feel unsafe.
So do you think they should be stopped from doing this?
Stop the hate marches.
Right.
These are hate marches.
What about free speech?
Well, we all allowed free speech, but every single Saturday, ever since October the 7th...
The government has to step on it.
Right.
And unfortunately...
So what should they be allowed to do? Because obviously they're upset about the killing.
Well, it works both ways. You know, we won't demonstrate if they don't demonstrate.
But with famine looming across Gaza and an imminent Israeli invasion of Rafah, the marches in London are unlikely to stop.
Do you worry that because of the controversy there might be people on either side, so to speak, who might want to use this to provoke the other side?
That's how you disarm the provokers. That's exactly how you disarm them. You say, welcome, come and join us. Great. We have a huge Jewish contingent here, massive Jewish contingent here, and they're here every week.
I'm assuming that you're Jewish, right?
I am, yeah.
And do you feel safe and welcomed in this protest?
Always have. I've been to most of the demos. The most uncomfortable I've been is in conversation with other Jews, actually.
The conversation in America is even more febrile. Sit-ins that began at New York's Columbia University have now spread to 14 campuses across the US, this at Emory in Atlanta. These Columbia students want their university to send a clear signal to all its funders with links to Israel.
Quad organizers have three demands. 1. Divest all finances, including the endowment, from corporations that profit from Israeli apartheid, genocide, and occupation in Palestine. 2. Complete transparency for all of Columbia's financial investments. 3. Amnesty for all students and faculty disciplined or fired in the movement for Palestinian liberation.
And at UCLA, California, these are deep, deep generational divides that are being torn further apart by a war thousands of miles away that feels so close to home. And everyone has an opinion.
Well, I've been speaking to the American civil rights activist, the Reverend Al Sharpton. We discussed the coming US election and the decision by philosophy professor and left-wing activist Cornel West to run for the presidency as an independent. But first, I began by asking him about the pro-Palestine demonstrations that have divided people on US campuses.
I certainly agree with the call for a two-state solution. I certainly agree with those saying Netanyahu should step down. I certainly think that it is an outrage what is going on in Gaza. I denounced what happened on October 7th. I think that the fervor of a lot of the students are right. What I've counseled them is they need to denounce the anti-Semitism and the hate and the identifying with Hamas. And don't let people that are extremists and that are biased hijack a legitimate moral movement.
And why do you think that is happening? Because the way you say it, you denounce the violence from Hamas, but you also denounce the excessive violence, in Gaza from the IDF. A lot of people say that, but it's not being said on the campuses, is it? It's not being said by the demonstrators.
Well, I think it is being said. I think that the louder voices are not saying it. I think a lot of it came from students that really started with a moral outrage, as in some cases, not all, that have been hijacked.
Now, I've just had recent conversations with some senior officials of the Democratic Party, and what they are really, really worried about, what keeps them up at night, are the third-party candidates like Cornel West or Robert Kennedy that could steal away, a few thousand votes here and a few thousand votes there, that, as we know in American elections, could make all the difference. What do you say to someone like Cornel West, who is a third-party candidate? Would you tell him to stand down and give Joe Biden the best chance?
I don't think I have the right to tell anybody to stand down. I ran in the Democratic primaries in 2024. Reverend Jesse Jackson ran in the 80s and Shirley Chisholm in the 70s. But we ran in the Democratic primaries. We could be in the debates so that we could bring up issues that had not been raised. They are running in general elections. So what I've said, and I have a lot of respect for Dr. West and others, is tell me what the strategy is. What is the plan? You're not going to be in the debates because you're not in the primaries, and they will not have you in the general election debate. So what is the strategy?
Well, the strategy might be a spoiler. I mean, it might be a spoiler, right?
Well,
and it is really possible that it would spoil things.
I think that what people need to ask them is, what's the end game here? That's what I had to answer when I ran for president.
Are you worried, as many people are, that Joe Biden, despite everything he's achieved in his first term as president, is just too old as a candidate to nail this election on November the 5th?
I think that Joe Biden is 3 years older than Donald Trump. So you're dealing with a race between two old white men. The question is what they stand for and what they will do. And I think if people in this country deal with what they stand for, then Joe Biden will nail it.
The question I hear more than any other, in this country, but also in the rest of Europe, is how come a nation of 330 million souls with so much talent can only come up with two white senior citizens, blokes, both of them, to compete for the highest office in the land?
Well, I think it's a good question, and I think that someone after November of 24 will answer it. Right now, the question is, can we stop democracy turning into an autocracy and deal with the hand we dealt? I'm trying to deal with a bad hand, but it's the hand we dealt, and we're going to win with it.
You're saying that Joe Biden is a bad hand?
No, I'm saying the situation is bad when you can't come up with more talent, as you raised the question. I think Joe Biden is a good candidate. He has probably been more productive than any president I've seen in his first 3 years. I think the circumstances that he's had to inherit is bad. He's been given a bad hand when you've got somebody who has tried to convince this country that the election was in 2020 was stolen, and that gives an inordinate amount of media time to someone who's obviously a demagogue.
As a civil rights campaigner, a veteran of the cause, has America ever been this divided?
I've not seen it as divided as it was in '68. In '68, we had a lot of the violence in terms of the inner city riots. We had different groups, or some even calling for the overthrow of the government. And the result was Richard Nixon, the Republican conservative, won. We cannot outrun the logic of what we are representing, because then we will lead in creating an atmosphere that only a guy like Donald Trump will benefit from.
Reverend Al Sharpton, thank you very much indeed for your time.